21st, 2020. But as always, the story continues, as you know, so we will be here for you on Sunday and throughout next week. Have a great weekend, everybody. Good night.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. After 3 tries, more than 3 decades of attempting it, Joe Biden last night finally got his party's nomination. A year ago, virtually no one would have predicted this moment. For most of the long primary season, Biden floundered near the bottom of a crowded field. He got so few votes in New Hampshire, he didn't even bother with a concession speech. He fled the state on a late-night charter flight and tried to pretend it never happened. In the end, Biden won anyway. The last kid picked for kickball somehow wound up captain of the team. So no matter what you think of him, that is an undeniable achievement. And yet still, even now, very few people take Joe Biden seriously. Why is that? Well, if you've seen Biden talk, you know why. He is fading. That's not a partisan point. It's not intended to be cruel. It's true. 77-year-olds generally are not meant to lead large countries. 77 is not the prime of life. It is old age. Vigor declines over the course of a lifetime, particularly in men. Joe Biden has grown weak. That's why we don't take him seriously. But as it turns out, there's another way to look at Joe Biden's decline. It's a perspective that hasn't occurred to most Republicans, but clearly it's at the center of the Democrats' election strategy. Yes, Joe Biden is slowing down. For 50 years, he couldn't stop talking. Now he has trouble starting sentences. He forgets words. He misnames states. Occasionally, he mistakes his sister for his wife. Every time he gets confused, Biden grins in that charming way old people do when they know they're losing it. So yes, Joe Biden has gotten a little daffy, but for that very reason, he's not going to hurt you. There is nothing threatening about him. He's not aggressive or overly ambitious. In a time of chaos and shouting, it might be comforting to be led by a man who talks about record players and wears slippers with the socks attached. That's the actual message, the subtext of the Biden campaign. No one in the Democratic Party will say it out loud. No one ever will. But Biden's handlers understand that his punchiness could be his biggest asset. Because Biden is so obviously ineffective, he's harmless. Because he is passive, you assume he is well-meaning. You wouldn't put Joe Biden in charge of your dinner reservations, but on the other hand, he's probably not going to send you to an internment camp. In that way, Biden is the mirror image of, say, Elizabeth Warren. Warren's eyes gleam with the menacing promise of Germanic efficiency. Biden's eyes are like windows onto an empty sky. There's nothing there, just a placid void. Democrats see an advantage in this. A party that no longer represents the mainstream needs a leader who won't scare voters. Joe Biden's job is to soothe your fears about what the left will do if they ever take power. Stacey Abrams or Beto O'Rourke could never do that. Their plans for you are too obvious. Joe Biden has no plans. The most radical mass political movement in American history has found a front man who seems like he should be feeding pigeons. Democrats are happy about that. If you didn't see Biden speak last night, you may not fully appreciate this dynamic. Some Republicans in Washington will tell you that Biden's acceptance speech was scary. It's their job to say things like that. But in this case, that's not true. Watch this clip and ask yourself what you disagree with.
But while I'll be a Democratic candidate, I will be an American president. I'll work hard for those who didn't support me, as hard for them as I did for those who did vote for me. That's the job of a president, to represent all of us, not just our base or our party. This is not a partisan moment. This must be an American moment. It's a moment that calls for hope and light and love, hope for our future, light to see our way forward, and love for one another. America isn't just a collection of clashing interests of red states or blue states. We're so much bigger than that.
An American moment, an American president, an American leader who represents everyone, regardless of party. A country that's more than just a collection of clashing interests, a future with hope and love for our fellow Americans. That's what Joe Biden promised last night. Is there anyone who doesn't want that? Well, the leaders of Joe Biden's party, for one thing. What you just heard does not represent the DNC's vision for America. It's not even close. Read their platform. Watch their speeches. We just spent all week doing it. Democratic leaders are not calling for unity. They are demanding division. They staged an entire convention that amounted to an extended tribute to the zero-sum viciousness of identity politics. This group gets this, that group deserves that. Give it to us now! A nation of 350 million people splintered into countless warring tribes, united by nothing apart from a common loathing of their own country. It was an orgy of anti-American grievance-mongering. And from start to finish, it was relentlessly, savagely partisan, even by the standards of a partisan political convention. Watch the Reverend Freddie Haynes explains that Jesus hates Republicans, too.
You had the nerve to build a wall while at the same time you have in the harbor there in New York a Statue of Liberty saying, give me your tired, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Jesus will say, America, if you don't get your act together, you may well go to hell.
America is headed to hell, says the Reverend Freddie Haynes, damned for eternity. Flames, smoke, pitchforks, gnashing of teeth, the whole thing. That's not speculation. It is a straight red-letter prediction from Jesus himself. And also, by the way, from the Reverend Jeremiah Wright of Chicago. Jeremiah Wright was the Reverend Freddie Haynes' spiritual mentor. He and Barack Obama have that in common. Jeremiah Wright didn't actually speak at this week's DNC, but he was certainly there in spirit. Kamala Harris channeled Jeremiah Wright in her primetime speech. Watch Harris diagnose America with a fatal case of racism.
There is no vaccine for racism. We've got to do the work. For George Floyd, for Breonna Taylor, for the lives of too many others to name. We've got to do the work to fulfill that promise of equal justice under law. Because here's the thing, none of us are free until all of us are free.
There's no vaccine, explains Dr. Harris. Looks like the patient won't make it. Sorry. America is dying from the virus of racism, and there's nothing we can do. We've reached the limits of modern medicine. We're going to have to let this country go and start over. Kamala Harris was hardly the only one to say that. Speaker after speaker this week hit the same theme. America is beyond redemption. Tear it down and build a new country with us in charge. There's just no vaccine for America's sin. It's terminal. It's unlikely that any major political party has ever had speakers say anything like this from the podium. Attacking the country you're trying to lead is a radical move, and typically it's not a good way to win a majority. But this message wasn't aimed at the majority. In fact, they would rather you didn't hear it. That's why they trotted out Joe Biden. The job of a president is to represent all of us, Biden reassured the country last night, not just our base. Everyone's for that. And yet virtually every word at the convention, other than Biden's speech, was aimed directly at the left's base, the coalition of the miserable that is the engine of the Democratic Party. Needless to say, the base loved it. Here's the single dumbest talking head on the single dumbest cable news channel clapping her hands in infantile glee because Democrats managed to exclude an entire racial group from this week's proceedings. And she's grateful for that. She just couldn't bear to look at them anymore.
It was all about representation. My little melanated, cynical heart, my immigrant melanated woman heart felt so full last night. Actually, today with David and John is the first time I see a white man like in 8 hours, this, other than Joe Biden last night. And that's okay. They've had 240 years of representation. They're going to be okay.
What kind of person would say something like that, or even think it? If you ever catch yourself feeling thrilled that you don't have to see certain racial groups, if you find people who look different from you that horrifying, that repulsive, then you can be certain that you are indeed a racist, a nasty one, too. And that's exactly the sort of person the Democratic National Convention was aimed at. Meanwhile, outside the convention, the base stayed busy. Thousands of Biden voters worked to help the Democratic ticket in the ways they know best, by hurting people and destroying things.
Whoa!
None of that was hidden. Anyone who lives in an American city or can navigate a computer knew exactly what was going on. But if you got your news exclusively from the Democratic message machine, you would have no idea. You'd have no clue that your country was being completely reshaped by violence in the streets. There was no mention of that at all from Democratic leaders at the convention this week. Antifa wasn't allowed to send delegates. Various speakers made BLM sound like a branch of the United Way. The media did not contradict this message. They simply refused to cover the violence outside. It was like it all never happened. It's possible that Joe Biden never found out about it. Biden doesn't get outside much. He knows only what they tell him. Judging from his speech last night, Biden has come to believe that he is Mahatma Gandhi, leading a movement to restore love to the human heart.
We can choose a path of becoming angrier, less hopeful, more divided, a path of shadow and suspicion, or we can choose a different path and together take this chance to heal, to reform, to unite, a path of hope and light.
A path of hope and light. It sounds like a Beatles lyric from their acid phase. But actually, it's a beautiful sentiment, if we're being honest. Who doesn't want hope and light? We all do. All decent people want that. And that's why it's a winning message in a national election. Unfortunately, it's also a deeply dishonest message. Unity is not what the Democrats are promising. Unity is not what they plan to deliver. The media understand that very well. They're committed Democrats themselves. Hope and light? Please. These people cheered when they thought Roger Stone was going to die in prison for some made-up crime. They cried when he was spared. These are hardened partisans, and not just the ones whose brothers are sitting governors. They know perfectly well that what Joe Biden said on stage last night was absurd. But they also know that many Americans will believe it. So they loved the speech.
It may have been the best speech that Joe Biden ever delivered.
I think this may be the best speech Joe Biden has ever delivered. This was one of the strongest speeches of Joe Biden's career.
It was probably the best speech I ever heard Joe Biden give.
Whoever wrote that speech needs to get a cookie and a hug and a flag and a puppy. That thing was crafted so well.
He came ready, Chris.
He absolutely did.
He spoke passionately and from the heart.
It is a tale of two visions of what this country is about. One is about anger. Joe Biden gave you something very different tonight. He said, and I quote, "I will draw on the best of us."
I am just like, if I could jump out of the chair. I mean, this is the best night for Joe Biden ever.
The best night for Joe Biden ever. Jennifer Granholm might be right about that. Unfortunately, in the short term, lies often work. CNN went farther than that, by the way. They described Biden's speech as, quote, "a moment when the destiny of a man and his nation converged." What does that mean for you exactly? What does it say about them? That's next. Joe Biden's speech last night at the Democratic National Convention wasn't really a speech. For our media, it was a transcendent, indeed almost biblical experience. The seas have parted, salvation is at hand. Joe Biden was able to read from a teleprompter effectively. That means the rapture's on the way. An actual headline from CNN's website reads this way, quote, "A moment when the destiny of a man and his nation converged." Give that man a raise. But CNN wasn't the only news organization beside itself. They all were, and they reacted this way to almost every speech all week. Watch.
Michelle Obama was riveting, one of the best speeches I've heard her give, and I've heard her give many speeches.
She is clearly one of the most talented political minds of our time right now.
She's also this kind of pop culture figure who also kind of comes across as your favorite next door neighbor.
It was all tied together in a beautiful bow by Michelle Obama.
I mean, this extraordinary speech. I mean, she's beautiful.
Michelle Obama is one of our most talented political thinkers in America. Quick, name something she said that isn't banal. Whatever. The bar's not that high if you're a Democratic Party figure who could plausibly be on the cover of Vogue. Steve Krakauer is the founder and editor of the media newsletter Fourth Watch. We're happy to have him on the show tonight. Steve, thanks so much for coming on. It does seem like, look, let's say you've got strong political views, you're covering this stuff on TV, you know, you can kind of shape the message in a way that's maybe more subtle than just coming out and calling a candidate Jesus, but they're going for that. Why?
Well, you talk about Joe Biden. I mean, this was a true victory in expectation setting. I mean, the expectations could not be any lower for Joe Biden's speech. And look, he exceeded them. So good for him. I mean, I think if he didn't go out there and say that you ain't black if you think a certain way, it would have been, you know, a big praiseworthy moment. No, you know, it's funny. You played a clip of Van Jones, actually, and Van actually said on air that, you know, as we were all preparing for it to be terrible, but as long as Joe Biden didn't embarrass himself, we were all going to come out here and praise it. It's like, Van, you're reading the stage directions and not the script. Like, that's something you're supposed to think and not say. You know, that it's set it up so that as long as he didn't, you know, go out there and call, you know, ask if someone's a junkie, it was going to be this perfect moment.
The Republican convention is next week. It's Monday. And so there's going to be not much time for people to forget the way the media responded to the Democrats as they compared the way the media responds to Republicans. Is that a problem, do you think?
Well, you know, I think that it's going to be very clear to contrast the two. I think that there's, honestly, I'm very curious to see how much of the Republican National Convention they even cover. You know, there was a story this week that some media networks actually covered a little bit less of the DNC than they were originally going to plan to, because they don't want to look like they're really giving a short shrift to the RNC when they really don't cover it next week very much at all. So I'd be very curious to see how it gets even covered, if at all.
So you think it's possible that they can, with a straight face, saying, you know, we gave this amount of time to the Democratic National Convention, we're giving less to the Republican National Convention?
Oh yeah, especially this year, right? I mean, look, you know, this is a Zoom convention. It was a pretty boring DNC, and I don't really necessarily fault them all that much. It kind of matched the tone of the vibe of Joe Biden, maybe very like a, you know, basement on Zoom. But I'm not sure it's going to be very different for the RNC either. It's a very strange and different, unique time. So it would not surprise me at all if there is a significant reduction in coverage next week than there would be 2016, 2012 going forward, because, you know, this is a very different time. I believe networks like CNN and others believe they are in this existential fight with the person in the White House. So covering it as this, you know, this great, essentially like, you know, documentary style for, you know, a campaign ad for 2 hours, I'd be very surprised if that happens and is not fact-checked immediately as these things are going on.
It's fine with me when reporters are tough on politicians, even ones I vote for. That's their job. It's the sucking up that bothers me a lot. And you worked in TV. If you're a TV producer and you see one of your on-air people, you know, say Michelle Obama's great, that's fine. But then say she's one of our most important public intellectuals, when of course that's absurd, would you get in the person's ear and say, settle down a little bit, you know, take a deep breath. She's not actually Socrates.
Yeah, well, look, it's honestly, it's unfamiliar to me. Like I was at CNN, Tucker, you were at CNN too.
Yes,
it
I
is
was.
it is a completely different world there, I think, right
Yeah.
now, and it's because they believe that they are in this fight. So I honestly, it's almost unrecognizable, the network right now. But I would say this: look, one of the biggest problems, Joe Biden, he can read from a teleprompter. He gave a good speech. Obviously, it's all about unity, and everyone liked
Yeah.
that. But look at the people who he's interviewed with, and his last two interviews, and he will be on ABC on Sunday. The last two people he's interviewed with is People Magazine and Cardi B. He is not being pressed by any significant, media figures, and I honestly don't even know if he would be pressed if they actually got him in a room and sat down with him. And wait till we get to the debates. I mean, assuming that all happens, Joe Biden and Donald Trump on stage in a way that you can't go and pick and choose how you're going to cover, then it's really going to see how this is all going to play out. And the media is not going to be able to really weigh in as much as they have been in the past.
No, they'll be against the debates. You watch. He's always welcome on this show, by the way. Well, we'd give him 2 blocks even. Steve Krakauer, great to see you tonight. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Tucker. Appreciate it.
We've got news tonight, an update in the case of that horrifying beating of an innocent man last week in Portland, Oregon. We'll tell you the latest next. Last Sunday in Portland, Oregon, a man authorities have identified as 25-year-old Marquise Love brutally beat another man, Adam Hayner, during that city's never-ending riots. We showed you the tape the other night. We're going to show it to you again. It's real. It happened. The other networks don't want you to see it. Here it is.
Back up. Back up. Back up, bro. Sit down. Sit down. Sit the down. Sit the down. Hey, bro, you're not leaving, bro. You're not going nowhere. Put your down. Sit your down. Hey, chill. You talking about?
This morning, authorities in Portland took Marquise Love into custody. There was a manhunt for him. They finally got him. He faces felony assault and riot charges. Hayner, the victim, said he tried to help someone who was being mugged. He believes he was targeted by the mob because of his skin color. Now, this story is an awful story, but it's more than about just one beating. It's about punishing normal people for the crime of living their lives in peace, which most of them do. As long as there is suffering anywhere, the mob believes, there must be suffering everywhere. So watch as rioters terrorize local residents in Portland this week for flying American flags on their porches.
Right here is another example of white men feeling comfortable. I bet you've never had a struggle in your life. Your flag represents incarcerated black bodies. Your flag! Your flag!
These are explicit racial attacks. This is explicit racial harassment. Would the country ever put up with this in any other context? No. But the Justice Department stands by. The local authorities stand by. Our media stands by. Democratic politicians stand by. Even Republicans. No one says anything. What did the people sleeping in their homes do wrong exactly? Well, nothing. They never attacked anybody. They didn't even fight back against the people screaming at them. All they're doing is living in peace. But that's not allowed. In Portland, major cities everywhere, you are not allowed to do that if they don't like the way you look. Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot wants you to know that rioting is good. She's totally for rioting. She's allowed it in her city for many weeks now. But you're not allowed to do it near where she lives. Watch.
I'm not going to make any excuses for the fact that given the threats that I have personally received, given the threats to my home and my family, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that they are protected. And I make no apologies whatsoever for that. And I have an obligation to keep my home, my wife, my 12-year-old, and my neighbors safe.
Well, to Lori Lightfoot, having a safe neighborhood is sort of like getting a haircut. No one is entitled to one except Lori Lightfoot. Meanwhile, scenes like this are playing out currently across your country.
Wake up! 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 I hear you! Wake up! Wake up! Wake up! Wake up! Wake up!
So what do you do if you find yourself surrounded by a mob like that? It could easily happen. No one's going to help you. No one you voted for will move a finger. No one who says, oh, I care about you, really cares. You're going to have to defend yourself and your family. How do you do that? Jack Carr knows the answer. He's a New York Times bestselling author, a former Navy SEAL. He's the author of The Terminal List, True Believer, and Savage Son, and we're happy to have him on tonight. Jack Carr, thanks so much for coming on. So we've been thinking about...
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I'm glad you're here. We've been thinking about doing this segment for a long time, and until we saw a recent piece you wrote, we didn't know who would be the right person. You clearly are. What do you do if you find yourself, for example, driving with your kids surrounded by a mob of screaming people?
Well, there's a few things to unpack here, and that the first one is that Lori Lightfoot, of course, she's not the only politician that does this. There are politicians and senior level officials across the country that do the exact same thing. And it is the height of hypocrisy to have a taxpayer-funded 24/7 armed security for the same people that want to defund the police on one hand and take your guns on the other. And I say the height of hypocrisy because we're talking about the most precious gift of all here. We're talking about human life, your life, the lives of your family members. And we know that police, by their very nature, no matter their intentions, they're going to get there after a crime has been committed. They respond to criminal activity. They're not standing next to you unless they happen to be on Lori Lightfoot's personal security detail. So,
what do you do
great point. Yeah, if you take this turn, and I started thinking about this. I've been thinking about it for a while. It's been my whole life, really, professionally and personally. But this video of the last few days, having this guy pulled out of his truck, beaten to within an inch of his life on the streets of America, and I thought, what if my wife is somewhere, she takes the wrong turn, all of a sudden she's surrounded by this mob. We have kids in the back of the car. We have a special needs child, like many people do. He's strapped into a seat in the back there. What is she supposed to do? So some of those basics are stay in the car, doors closed, locked doors, windows up, and that only allows you some level of protection. It does give you a level of protection, but it only goes so far. But the main thing is to avoid those right away. So situational awareness, looking around, being aware that there are threats, picking your head up out of that phone, and turning around. If you turn a corner and you see something that doesn't look right, as a Army Special Forces sniper from Vietnam told me years ago, he said, if it doesn't look right, it's probably not. So trust those instincts and pay attention to that sixth sense that has kept us alive as a species since we've been on this planet. If it doesn't look right, turn around, reverse, get out of there. Now, if you're surrounded by a mob, violent mob, like we saw in Virginia, a woman in her car, kids in the back, surrounded by a mob that's beating on her windows, beating on the doors, beating on the hood, beating on the, climbing on top of her car, calling 911 and being told by the dispatcher, we can't send the police. But you can call your city council and express your frustrations to them. So meanwhile, she is scared, her kids are scared. She made it out of there, luckily. So remember, your vehicle is a weapon, but you don't want to be in that position to begin with. Now, if you do get to that phase where you have to fight, it's good to be prepared and to know how to fight. And we've seen, even before these riots, we saw an uptick in gun sales, uptick in ammunition sales, and then those riots hit, and we saw even more so, just compounded. So we've also seen is people wanting to get training with that firearm, which is the most important part. If you're going to invest in that firearm, to also invest in that training. And right now, for better or for worse, we've been at war for close to 20 years now. And that means we have a lot of people with experience that have come back from the battlefield. They're in the private sector. They're passing on their lessons learned. They're passing on those skills. And we're about to get a lot more law enforcement into the tactical training industry as well, as they leave their departments in droves. And who can blame them? So we're about to get that. And you don't have to be a veteran of the military or law enforcement to be a great firearms trainer. All you have to do, search for these people, do a web search, and get that training. And for those that have I don't know, are wrestling with the fact that they might have to defend themselves, I always think, hey, what if you were to just appear here out of nowhere? If you just appeared out of thin air and all of a sudden you were violently attacked by a person or a group of people, you wouldn't need a piece of paper that told you it was okay to defend this gift of human life. And I wrote something down here. It's from Cicero, and I didn't want to misquote Cicero on your program, but he said, there exists a law inborn of our hearts by natural intuition. If our lives are endangered by plots or violence or armed robbers or enemies, any and every method of protecting ourselves is morally right. So protecting your life, the lives of your loved ones, is as natural as breathing.
It is. It's the most basic right. It's the fundamental right. Jack Carr, I knew you were the right man to talk to. I hope you will come back for some more granular lessons on what that would look like. We appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you.
Certainly will. Take care, Tucker.
Well, the Pentagon has announced a new UFO task force. Turns out the X-Files are real. We'll tell you what they're working on next. The vast majority of people out there on the streets wrecking our country have not been charged. But actress Lori Loughlin has been charged. She was sentenced today for the crime of clumsily bribing officials to get her unqualified daughters into the University of Southern California. Why would you want to do that? Not clear, but she tried. Now, it's important to emphasize that the real federal crime here was not that Loughlin used her celebrity status to gain an unfair advantage. That happens a lot. Prominent liberals have placed their mediocre children into prestigious schools, much more prestigious than USC, for a long time, in fact, forever. For those students, people like Chelsea Clinton, Dante de Blasio, CNN's bodybuilding correspondent, the admissions department at schools like Stanford, Oxford, Yale were more like welcoming committees. But Lori Loughlin went wrong by being too obvious about it. Next time she wants to get one of her kids into USC, she'd be better off calling a Democrat, and then we can be certain everyone will just look the other way and call her kid a genius. Genius. DOD has announced the creation of a new UFO task force. It'll analyze the nature and origin of unidentified aerial phenomenon. That news comes after several videos surfaced showing U.S. Navy pilots coming across unknown objects moving in ways that seem to defy physics. We played them on the show. Those images were captured by advanced jets using infrared technology. So what will this task force be looking at, and what do we think they'll find? Nick Pope is the man we ask these questions to. He's a former UK Ministry of Defense official. He joins us tonight. Nick, thanks so much for coming on. So we've touted this story a couple of times that there's this new task force, but we haven't gotten into the details, and this is an important story, just to be clear, maybe even more important than our presidential election. It's not clear what they're looking for and what people who pay attention expect them to find. What do you think?
Well, when the Senate Intelligence Committee demanded a report on all this from the Director of National Intelligence, one of their concerns was that a lot of different people in the US government, the military, the intelligence community, maybe were doing things on this, but no one was pulling it all together. So I think one of the first things this task force will have to do is find out who knows what about this and pull it all together and see what we already have on this issue, perhaps highly classified and deeply compartmentalized.
So one piece of information it would be nice to get right away is, where is the physical evidence? There is apparently somewhere in the bowels of a U.S. government storage facility physical evidence, the remains of one of these unidentified flying objects. So why don't we know more about that?
Well, I've heard these stories too about this debris, this metamaterial, whatever one calls it. And again, I think the task force must have access to all that information. And one hopes the fact, I mean, this is a Navy lead, interestingly, probably because of all these videos, of course, these interactions with the US Navy jets that you mentioned. But the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security also has oversight of this. And that's very important. And I hope the task force will get to the bottom of this and find out what these materials are. And look, is this something of ours? Is it Russia? Is it China? Or is it something else? The time has come when we need answers to these questions.
It's pretty clear from our conversations with U.S. government officials that they've ruled out Russia and China. They don't believe these are aircraft from foreign militaries. Why would they be keeping the details from the public? What's your best guess?
Well, I think all of these programs, when you get into this subject, it's all very highly classified. And of course, when you've got these interactions between the phenomena, whatever it may be, and these multi-billion-dollar assets, the U.S. aircraft carriers, the Nimitz, the other ones involved in this. I mean, there are extreme sensitivities. And that's the other point. No government really likes to turn around and say, look, we've lost control of our own airspace here. There's something in our skies faster and more maneuverable, and we don't know what it is.
Yeah, and maybe our understanding of physics isn't broad enough. No, I think it's a very good point. Nick Pope, thank you for that update. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Democrats, as you doubtless know, control virtually every lever of power in the state of California. The largest state in the union effectively is a kind of laboratory for left-wing ideas. Democrats can do whatever they want. No one pushes back. So no state is closer to enacting the Green New Deal. No state is even near as close as California is. So what does the Green New Deal look like? Well, this week, California is grappling with historic blackouts. Millions of people going without power. It is third world. According to a new report, the organization that manages the state's electrical grid was totally unprepared for the heat wave underway there now. It's August and hot. They had no idea. Now we're told that another wave of blackouts could strike within days. Again, still August. The governor of California, Gavin Newsom, has called the situation, quote, unacceptable and unbefitting of the nation's largest and most innovative state. Not innovative enough to predict the obvious, however. California's energy operators have warned for years that renewable energy, including solar energy, doesn't make it work. You can't ensure that residents get electricity if you rely too much on renewable energy. So Democrats like Gavin Newsom complain about power outages, but they're pushing more reliance on renewable energy. Right now, the state of California uses about 36% renewables for its power grid. Democrats would like to increase that to 60%. What'll happen then? You know, more Californians will lose power, but they'll keep doing it because the ideology is more important than the lives of the people who vote for them. We're telling you about this because we think it's really important for you to understand, the rest of the country to understand what this means in real terms. It means moving backwards, obviously. Well, the Democratic convention isn't all bad. Some people on stage watch this show. We're flattered. We'll show you what we mean next.
Vote to 30330 to learn more. 30330. It's actually not that hard to remember. Watch. Person, woman, man, camera, TV, 30330. Anyone can do it.
You recognize that. That's the interview that our own Dr. Mark Siegel did, referenced recently at the Democratic National Convention. Of course, we're flattered. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like Democrats listened to too many other things on that show. Watch Kamala Harris explain the real dangers of the Wuhan coronavirus.
And while this virus touches us all, we got to be honest. It is not an equal opportunity offender. Black, Latino, and indigenous people are suffering and dying disproportionately. And this is not a coincidence. It is the effect of structural racism. Joe will bring us together to end this pandemic and make sure that we are prepared for the next one.
We've got to be honest, which means they're lying, and in this case, they are. Structural racism can't even be defined. Racism has nothing to do with this virus. It's a virus. It's science. But they're telling you that anyway. In Maine, they seem to think the problem is that restaurant servers, waiters and waitresses aren't wearing dog cones. An official government document from the state of Maine says that in order to prevent coronavirus, waiters need to wear a shield that is, quote, designed to be worn inverted, attaching below the face like a collar open at the top of the shield. Huh? Would you want to eat there, and will it work? Dr. Mark Siegel is a Fox News medical contributor, a very famous one now. He joins us tonight. Hey, doctor.
Good to see you, Tucker. Well, as far as those dog collars are concerned, they're called cones of shame, and you actually can't eat in them, I don't think. I don't think you can eat in them. So in other words, maybe they'll keep you from getting COVID if there is any COVID in Maine, but there's only 19 new cases, by the way, over the last 24 hours. The restaurant owners are in shame, and they can't eat. Now, in terms of the idea of someone else riding to the rescue here and becoming the president and imposing a national policy of perhaps lockdowns again, which have cost us great in terms of mental and physical suffering and medical problems and tremendous damage to the economy, I want to propose an idea that has not been talked about enough, Tucker. Tucker, the current president is a deal maker. And you know that he has used the Defense Production Act 78 times, according to the White House, to bring the supplies we needed, the masks we needed, the ventilators we needed. The testing has ramped up. The vaccine we've talked about on this show, Operation Warp Speed, is unbelievable at the rate that it's performing the science. And the treatments that are in the pipeline, all because of public-private partnership, and a lot of businesses ponied up in that direction without the superimposition of the government. The other point I want to make, when you talk about national lockdowns, and by the way, the party of national lockdowns is also allowing, of course, protesting, where masks are not superimposed or even physical distancing is not superimposed. So there's a certain inconsistency to that. But the most important thing, Tucker, is states vary from one state to the next. How can you superimpose something on Florida right now, which has done so well and is actually down in terms of the case rate of positivity to 8%, or California down now, rates are going down 6.6%, meaning that if you're tested, there's only a 6% chance you're even going to be positive, or New York, or New...
No, that's such a great question. How can a country, as I'll use the word diverse as this, benefit from a one-size-fits-all standard? I want to play a piece of tape for you. This is Vice President Joe Biden asked about COVID, and I want to see your response to this. Here it is.
If you're sworn in come January and we have coronavirus and the flu combining, which many scientists have said is a real possibility, would you be prepared to shut this country down again?
I would be prepared to do whatever it takes to save lives.
If the scientists say shut it down?
I would shut it down. I would listen to the scientists.
Would shut it down. So
Well,
that's
disturbing.
unequivocal right there.
Tucker, that's very disturbing because, first of all, we're not even predicting a severe flu season because in the Southern Hemisphere we're not seeing it. But that aside, what about all of the costs of another lockdown imposed? Yeah. Kids that can't get their teeth taken care of, or eyeglasses, no nutrition, problems with mental health, problems with physical health, operations that are put off. Many more people will die of heart disease and cancer from extended lockdowns than will ever die of COVID-19. That's not to mention the depression and the suicide. And again, locking the whole country down, locking down Montana with no cases, locking down Maine, 19 cases. And, you know, and we're going to see more of those superimposed dog collars, I suppose, where owners in restaurants are going to have to wear these cones of shame as the state is locked down with 19 cases.
But politicians become more powerful. Dr. Mark Siegel, thank you. Great to see you. That's it for us. Have a great weekend. See you Monday.
Welcome to this special edition of Hannity, Countdown to the Election. I'm Tammy Bruce, in tonight for Sean. After 4 very long days, the Democratic National Convention has finally, mercifully, come to an end. Last night, Joe Biden capped off the week with a mostly forgettable speech, short on policy details, but full of negative platitudes against President Trump and the state of our country today. President Trump, however, responded. Take a look at this.
Joe Biden grimly declared a season of American darkness. And yet, look at what we've accomplished. Until the plague came in, look at what we've accomplished. And now we're doing it again. Where Joe Biden sees American darkness, I see American greatness. We've seen heroic doctors and nurses racing into action to save lives. We've seen first responders helping strangers in need. We've seen the passage of historic legislation to save 50 million American jobs. We've mobilized American industry like never before. It's time to reject the anger and the hate of the Democrat Party. We have the biggest election coming up of our lifetime.
President Trump also fiercely criticized what Joe Biden conveniently left out of his remarks. Watch this.
But the biggest part of last night's speech was what Joe Biden didn't talk about. He didn't talk about law enforcement. He didn't talk about bringing safety to Democrat-run cities that are totally out of control and they have no clue. China was never mentioned in any way, shape, or form. China will own our country if he gets elected. They will own our country, and we're not going to let that happen.
Yeah, boy, what a difference in attitude there. So ultimately, Biden was so short on details because the radical Democratic agenda is downright frightening. As former Governor Chris Christie remarked, it scares the bejesus out of people. Watch this.
You didn't hear any specifics last night.
None.
For Joe Biden. And the reason for that is because his specifics would scare the bejesus out of America. And he knows it. It's a crazy left-wing liberal agenda that he has been captive of now, and he gave into in order to get the nomination, and that he will pursue if he's elected.
Joining us now with reaction is American Conservative Union Chairman Matt Schlapp and Fox News contributor Charlie Hurt. Guys, thank you so much for joining me tonight. You know, it is nice that the convention is over, even though President Trump got this really nice bump during the convention, which was, of course, interesting in and of itself. But, Matt, let me start with you. You know, when we talk about their lack of a willingness to talk about policy details, isn't it possible that they've been promising both the left and their so-called pragmatic moderates the same thing, that they're both in charge and that they can't talk about details because it would offend or frighten their part of their own base? Matt?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Tammy, which is, if you look at the Socialist Manifesto that Bernie Sanders and AOC negotiated with Biden, it's the most extreme policy document that we've ever seen in politics. And if it got the, if it got the sunshine that it deserves, people would be appalled. Chris Christie says they would scare the bejesus out of people. They're actually not really even into bejesus at all. If you look at what their policies would do for an economic recovery, you can't raise taxes on everybody in this country and also say you're going to bring the economy back. You can't say you're going to take all of those Obama-era regulations that Trump has taken off the economy to stop domestic energy production, to allow small businesses to prosper. If you put those all back on the economy, there's no way we're going to have a recovery because America won't become competitive again. If America isn't competitive, that helps China and our economic adversaries overseas. And how about this, Tammy? Does it make any sense to make nuns pay for the abortions in this country? Can't we have some kind of zone of First Amendment freedom to practice your religion or to not practice your religion? What is wrong with these radicalized socialist Democrats? I tell you what, I think if the American people know more, they will vote for Donald Trump.
Yeah. Well, look, this is not, I think, unknown to the American people, Charlie, in that this is the Obama-Biden administration was not so long ago. We know what they did. We know what a disaster it was. Biden's been in for 47 years in government. We know the difference Donald Trump has brought forward. We know what's happened now with China and the China virus. Charlie, do you really think that the American people can be gaslit in this way, that they don't want answers or don't want specifics? How long can Joe Biden get away with this?
Yeah, I have a real hard time thinking that the American voters are not onto this. Voters are very smart. They're much smarter than I think Washington politicians ever give them credit for being. It's a real strange little gambit that Joe Biden is trying to play here. On the one hand, he's talking about how racist America is, how awful America is, how unfair America is. And then on the other hand, he has to acknowledge, which you just pointed out, which is that he's been part of the problem in Washington for 47 years. And if America is this horrible place, he's never done anything to fix any of it. And 8 of those years, he was the #2 guy in the White House. So whatever it is that he's attacking Donald Trump for, he has to take some credit for that himself, which is why really all of this is just political. It's all nonsense. You know, when Barack Obama on the night that he spoke said that when he blamed Donald Trump for 170,000 deaths in America because of the Wuhan plague, I thought to myself, wow, Barack Obama doesn't want Joe Biden to win, because you would never say that if you wanted a politician to win. And then Joe Biden turns around and says it himself. It's such a nasty line of attack, and it's so hopeless, and it's so dishonest. And I think the American people realize that. In fact, there's no doubt in my mind that the American people realize how dishonest that is.
Well, it's dishonest, but also I think, Matt, it can be confusing. If you think that America is racist, you're talking about Americans being racist, you're talking about this country being a pit that cannot be saved, then what is it exactly that is worth saving? He seems to be contradicting himself in his own commentary about the nation.
This is the problem with systemic racism. It's this term they throw out there. But it's an indictment of the entire American experience. Because what systematic racism means, Tammy, and you know this, it means that I can't choose to be virtuous in my treatment of other human beings because the system is so bad that I'm just going to get caught up in the rottenness of the system, so that a young black man or a person of color can't rise above their problems in life because the system is so rotten. It makes people of color not try as they should and not feel hope, and it makes white people feel like no matter what they do, they're just rotten and they stink. And that is exactly the opposite of what America believes.
It's the ultimate disaster, because what you're doing is you're condemning everyone immediately, that there is no hope. You know, gone is the hope and change dynamic of Barack Obama. With Joe Biden, everything is already lost, which Americans, we reject this. It certainly is not the American way, and it's not the nature of how we view our future. And that it will be interesting. Gambit, as you said, Charlie, is an interesting way to put it. We'll see. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. Matt Schlapp, Charlie Hurt, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Now, unlike Joe Biden, President Trump will actually visit another state during his convention. On Monday, as the RNC formally kicks off, the president will head north to North Carolina to visit local farmers. And joining us now with a preview of next week's events is RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel. Ronna, welcome aboard. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Great to be with you.
Well, you've been very busy. You've been very steady. You've been a great voice during this process, because there are different messages, clearly. The Democrat message is that everything is lost. America is a hellscape, that we can't make any difference for it. It's done. And then you've got President Trump, who is reminding us about the American ideal, about what we want for the future, about the power of the American sensibility. What can we actually expect now for this next week coming up? What will the approach of the president be?
Well, I think your point at the beginning was exactly right. Donald Trump's going to be in North Carolina on Monday. Donald Trump was also in Wisconsin, the state where Joe Biden had his convention that he never showed up to, and President Trump continues to travel this country and bring messages of hope and talk about the greatness of America throughout the country. So in our convention, you're going to see this aspirational message. The president is going to put forward a plan for the next 4 years, but he's also going to talk about how his policies have directly affected real people. It's going to be the American story, not the Hollywood script and fiction that was put forward by the Democrats this past week.
You know, what I do love about him, and I think one of the many reasons why he won in 2016 was we saw him fall in love with the country through the campaign. I don't know what he thought maybe at the beginning of the campaign, but when he began to meet us, he realized the potential in who we were and that we were worth saving. And we recognize that as well, even though we'd been told for a number of years prior through the Obama-Biden administration that we weren't really worth saving. And he, you know, his travel to states, I think this speaks to that as well, recognizing the value and the importance of the states as they exist versus an overarching federal response to things. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. The president loves this country, but more importantly, he loves the people of this country. And he ran because of those people who didn't have a voice in Washington, that didn't have lobbyists, that weren't the elite from the coasts, that were the voices from Hollywood or big tech. He ran for the farmer, for that blue-collar worker on the line in Michigan. He ran for the everyday man who didn't have a voice in Washington, and he said, you deserve better. You deserve better from your politicians. I'm going to go drain the swamp, and I'm going to do things better. And he has, with deregulation and cutting taxes and policies that have unleashed our energy independence and made people's lives better across the country. Democrats were so dishonest in their convention, talking about the Obama-Biden administration and all the things they did to hurt our country. Yeah. Donald Trump has brought us back, and he's going to do it again after this pandemic.
Yeah, I think that's clear. He kept promises. At the same time, of course, he also made Republicans mad on occasion. I think the RNC is learning a bit when it comes to the nature of how to approach the American people outside of that beltway, and it's making all of us better. Ronna, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I appreciate it. Now,
thanks for having me.
Coming up, the Democrats. My pleasure. The Democrats this week at their convention ignored completely the lawlessness plaguing liberal cities across this country. Emily Campagno, Leo Terrell, and Austin Goolsbee join us next as this special edition of Hannity continues.
Is this okay? Do you like our lawmakers' constant bickering? If not, take 15 minutes at informedvoters.net to help our country unite.
Here's a hint about how to make working from home less stressful and more comfortable. Make the switch to X-Chair. Infinite side-float recline and dynamic variable lumbar support make the X-Chair a customer favorite at home and work. The X-Chair lets you customize for the same measure of amazing comfort no matter what your size. Every model is in stock, ready to ship the next day. And you can get $100 off any model on our website. Your new normal? Incredibly comfortable. Call or click to order today.
Welcome back to this special edition of Hannity. Unsurprisingly, the Democrats completely ignored the lawlessness plaguing liberal cities at their convention this week as we saw brutality continue to unfold in our streets. A vicious attack on a truck driver in Portland was captured on video Sunday night. The prime suspect in that case, Marquise Love, surrendered to the police, thank goodness, this morning. And in New York City this week, another debacle. A retired NYPD sergeant was horrifically, brutally beaten in the Garment District. That's pretty much Midtown. The incident was captured by security cameras. Now, amid the growing violence, the media finally asked Biden about the defund the police movement. Here is what he had to say.
I don't want to defund police departments. I think they need more help. They need more assistance. And we have to make it clear that this is about protecting neighborhoods, protecting people, everybody across the board. So the only guy that actually put in a bill to actually defund the police is Donald Trump.
Well, that's a little bit of a shift. Oh, yeah, Joe? Then why did the National Association of Police Organizations endorse Trump after they backed you and Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012? And let's not forget that Biden previously said that he would be willing to, quote, redistribute funds away from police departments, saying that police have become the enemy, while Kamala praised the defunding of the LAPD. So why is, and you saw her nodding there as he was talking, so why is Biden ignoring the crime wave and chaos in America's major cities? Well, joining me now with a reaction, attorney and Fox News contributor Emily Campagno, civil rights attorney, a man with very little to say, Leo Terrell, and former chair of the Council of Economic Advisors to President Obama, Austin Goolsbee. Everybody, welcome aboard. Thanks for joining me tonight. I appreciate it. Now, let me start, actually, Austin, with you. You know, I've heard Barack Obama make specific statements that what is happening now, and even in violence that was occurring during his administration, was not the way to go, that this was not acceptable, that things had to be done differently. And yet, not only at the convention, but in general, we have not heard leading Democrats in the party condemn what's been going on, except for that little bit about defunding the police, when the messaging prior to that had been the opposite. Are they realizing now it's a bigger problem than they thought? Are they looking at polls? Why suddenly the shift?
Well, I don't know that there was a shift. I mean, you started by trying to portray that as a partisan thing. I would point out that 8 of the 10 highest violent crime rates are red states. And if you take the reddest city in America, it's Oklahoma City, it has the same population as Portland, Oregon, and its murder rate is double that in Portland. Crime is a bad issue. I think the Democrats were more focused on the lawlessness coming out of the White House than they were on general lawlessness or the crime rate.
Well, that's a little bit of a jog. Americans see what's going on, Emily, throughout the country. Mostly, if it's blue states, they see Portland, certainly. They see Seattle. It's New York. We see Chicago. It is not red states. You've got Texas, but you've got Austin, a blue city. Regardless, we've got at least President Trump taking action against that with Operation Legend, being very, very aggressive in that regard. But the Democrats seem to be silent or passive. Emily, can they continue being silent on the violence that's going on?
Well, if they do so, it will be with the consequence that they will lose votes in November. And to respond to Austin's points, that's actually aptly said, in that the focus indeed is on the federal government, but to the point where it's missing the voter. We absolutely understand that we are being ignored, all of us in these cities, especially those that are being rocked by violence. And I don't understand why there's an inability to acknowledge that there can be a zero tolerance for violence, and also a commitment to amplification of Black voices, and also to commitment to synthesis and participation and a whole host of other things, where so many things can be true at the same time. I think the average voter isn't a total partisan hack and isn't totally obsessed with President Trump, and therefore deserves a nuanced, acceptable answer. I think hearing Joe Biden's comments made sense, and it was interesting why he wasn't saying it before, and for Kamala Harris, who referring to herself as a top cop, but then of course it's telling that the police union isn't enforcing them or isn't endorsing them, because as they say, they are sick of being considered a punching bag. So I think that they're losing millions of voters, frankly, with the inability to even articulate that many things can be true at the same time, as well as just a commitment to law and order.
Well, and Leo, it's also, we think about the issue of law and order versus simply safety. Regardless of who you are, if you live in an urban area, if you live in the suburbs, regardless of your complexion, your sex, sexual orientation, whatever, this is now an issue of safety. Are you going to be safe in your own city? And can there be law enforcement, and can they be empowered? Leo, you and I come from the same general area in Los Angeles. And, you know, people are afraid everywhere now. What would you say, being from the West Coast, we know what's going on here on the East Coast, what's happened to Los Angeles and the nature of Los Angelinos responding to mayhem in general that's unfolding everywhere?
Well, the same thing is happening in all these Democratic cities, Los Angeles, Portland, and Seattle. And Austin, for you to bring up Oklahoma City, that's just you're trying to use smoke and mirrors. Let's be very clear. The Democrats during the convention didn't say one thing about the chaos in those cities. Why? Because they're basically supporting Black Lives Matter. Austin, Black Lives Matter? Which Black lives? Black when there's a police officer, or is there a black-on-black crime in Chicago? Or what about the police officer, David Dorn? For Austin to come in here and talk about Oklahoma City and not talk about the chaos. The Democrats cannot talk about crime in these cities because they're run by Democratic mayors. And the thing that's so amazing about it, they play the race card throughout that entire convention. Isn't it amazing, Austin? And I hope you answer my question, is that Chicago is run by Black people, Black police chiefs, and they call racism. So all the Democratic convention try to do is talk about racism in Democratic cities and ignore the crime in Democratic cities. One last point. President Trump offered help to these Democratic cities, but Austin didn't want anything to do with it. Austin, answer my question. Let's not talk about Oklahoma. Talk about Chicago, Seattle, and Washington. Please.
Austin, go for it. What do you have to say?
Well, you had quite a few questions in there, and so let me try to address some of them. I still don't see how you get away from the fact that 8 of the 10 most violent crime states in the country are red states. That is a problem that we must... That is a problem that we must address across partisan lines. Now, in Portland, the president sent in federal agents and caused violent crime.
To protect a federal building. To protect a federal building.
To protect a federal building. Dramatically.
To protect a federal building. To protect a federal building.
It wasn't just to protect the federal building. That was the problem.
Answer question.
Leo and Austin, gentlemen.
I'm not playing games.
I beg your pardon. Just a minute. No, just gentlemen, thank you very much. Bottom line is, when the federal agents were withdrawn, the violence continued, and it continued against local law enforcement, completely debunking the myth that the federal agents were somehow responsible for the violence in Portland. That's already been debunked. We've been seeing now, weeks later, that they're now going after local law enforcement. So, gentlemen, thank you. Obviously, this is something that the Democrats don't want to discuss because it deals with policy, liberal attitudes, and restrictions on police and what it is they're able to do, and blaming, of course. Now, coming up, thank you, all of you. Appreciate it. Coming up, the liberal media could not contain their excitement this week. And last night, they were fawning over Joe Biden's remarks. We'll play you the tape as this special edition of Hannity continues.